Assurance Committee, chaired by myself, Councillor Boston, here on Thursday, the 3rd of September 2020. This meeting is being held in accordance with the local authorities and police and crime panels flexibility for coronavirus for local authorities and police and crime panels meetings regulations 2020 for England and Wales. The meeting is available and accessible to members of the public who are free to video, photograph, tweet, blog as they wish. I'd like to start the meeting with any apologies, please.
Mr. Chair, we've received apologies from Councillors Heavican, Jarvis, Moore and Priest.
And before we go to the next item of the meeting, I'd like to ask Steph to ask members of the committee to introduce themselves, please.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Can I just ask Councillors Allen and Yassine to just introduce themselves, please?
Councillor Pete Allen, good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Good evening. Councillor Yassine?
He's left. He's not here, sorry, Chair.
Okay, we don't have Councillor Yassine. Okay, hopefully you'll join us perhaps in a moment. The second item on the agenda is any members to declare any conflicts of interest for matters to be discussed at this meeting. Nothing to declare from myself. Councillor Allen, anybody else, any of the independent members? No? Okay, let's move on to the third item, which is to the minutes of the meeting of the 9th of January 2020 as a correct and accurate record. I guess I can propose that. Do I have a seconder?
Chair, Councillor Allen has his hand up.
Councillor Allen?
Councillor Allen, your microphone's off.
Try again.
Yes, we can hear you now, Councillor Allen. Yes, okay, thank you very much indeed. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Allen.
Your microphone's on mute again.
I think we've got you on mute again.
It's on now. I'll leave it on.
Yes.
Yes, I'd second the minutes, accuracy of the minutes from the previous meeting, 9th of January.
Great, I'm grateful, Councillor Allen. Thank you very much. Moving to the next item, revised governance statement, and if we can go to Narinda, please.
Councillor Boston, I was going to pick that up if that's okay with
yourself. Of course, Peter. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so this is the 2018-19 annual governance statement. The committee actually had sight of it in a draft format back in July 2019, because at the time you had sight of it because it would then sit within the statement of accounts that were due to come to the following meeting. Obviously, because of the delay in the 18-19 statement of accounts, which are coming later today, the annual governance statement as such has been on hold since that time. Now that the statements are ready, it's been revisited and updated a little. It actually exists and is live until the point that the accounts are signed off. But because we're now also at the end of the 2019-20 statement of accounts process as well, rather than duplicate the last 12 months of activity, the 18-19 AGS sort of remains as was, but with a little caveat in there to point out that obviously 12 months have passed and new issues have emerged that we weren't aware of at the time, not least COVID-19 and Brexit. So it does reflect those sort of post-year-end events, but it doesn't go into a great amount of detail. What it does do is, as at July 19, it pulls together the governance framework across the council and sort of sets that framework against the SIP for Solace good practice for local government. And there are 7 of those principles, and within the AGS we identify how the council meets each of those requirements and where it can gain assurance that it's operating within that sort of good governance framework that SIP for Solace mentioned. However, it does also identify that there are issues that the council does need to address, and those are put in an action plan that forms part of the governance statement. Within that action plan, there were 6 areas identified, and they were around children's services, the medium-term financial strategy, contract procurement rules and GDPR requirements, cyber security and school place planning. So what we've done there is we've listed within the statement where action needs to be taken against those, who's responsible for it, and when those actions are going to be completed. Obviously, since that time, 12 months have passed, and at your meeting in November, you'll receive the 2019-20 annual governance statement, which will give you an update on how successful or not the council has been in carrying forward those actions. So as I said at the start, it's a slightly odd, unique document in that it really reflects a historic period of time, but it's still a requirement to fit within the statement of accounts. So you've got it here, and it will be later within the statement of accounts. But for now, we were just asking the committee if they've got any comments on the statement and if they're happy to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter Farrow, Head of Internal Audit at the Council. Any comments or questions from members, please, pertaining to this? Any indications? I appreciate, as Peter mentioned, it is somewhat some time since that particular period has occurred, so I do appreciate.
Mr. Hussain has.
Mr. Hussain, please.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, am I unmuted?
You are. We can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you. Just a quick one on page 16 of the pack. There's something there that talks about the assumptions for the 18-19 statements have been reviewed in light of Brexit and COVID-19. And I just wonder if that review resulted in anything in terms of changes to the 18-19 statement of accounts.
It didn't, because those 2 events, I guess Brexit is part way through now with Britain having left the EU, but still in a transitional period. So there hasn't been any significant impact on the council at this point in time. And obviously COVID, while it came to light in the gap between the end of the 18-19 year and where we are now, finally signing it off, it didn't actually have any impact upon 18-19, because obviously it was around about February, March 20 when that came to light, and that will be further addressed in the next governance statement and in the action plans the council have got in taking forward what we need to do to remedy the issues that have arisen from both COVID and will no doubt come from Brexit.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Any further questions from members on this item? No one indicating from what we can see. Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Peter. That's very useful.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the next item.
We just need to vote on that.
Oh, sorry, yes, we do need to vote on that, and in the new way of voting with how we're actually bringing forward this meeting today. So I'm happy with that. I'll vote in favour. Councillor Allen?
Yeah, I support that, Councillor Boston.
Thank you.
Obviously, one of the key ones in there was on that year was school place planning, where we were hoping to find an additional 600 places. I'd like to think in the one that we've got coming up in our next meeting, we'll identify that we addressed that, as we didn't in whatever shape or form. But bearing in mind that we are where we are, then obviously I'd rather move this or second it, whichever way you wish me to go. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Allen. Did someone indicate to come in on that? No. We of course did look at school place planning as well during the year in question. Obviously the committee makeup remains the same now in light of the coronavirus pandemic, and as Councillor Allen said, I'm sure we can look at that in the governance statement to come for this particular year. Let's move on, if we may, to the annual statement of accounts 2018-2019. I'd like to invite Zoe Thomas and Mark Stocks from Grant Thornton, please.
Councillor Boston, that's me, Rebecca.
Oh, hi, Rebecca. Yes, if you want to start off on this one.
Yeah. So I'm finally able to present to you the statement of accounts for 2018-19 for approval. I know it's been some time coming. So can I firstly apologise for the delay in being able to bring this to Audit Committee. In summary, the main reason for this delay relates to the accounting treatment of the council's wholly owned company, Sandwell Land and Property. This company was set up in 2012 to hold the school land and buildings, and up until 2018-19, the accounting treatment has been for both sets of assets to remain on the council's balance sheet. This was because it had been agreed with the council's previous auditors that the lease agreements for these assets meant that the risks and rewards of both remained with the council, and therefore the assets should be held on the council's balance sheet. Grant Thornton's audit and technical team, as our new auditors for 2018-19, had a different view on this in terms of the land and felt that this should be held on the SLAP's balance sheet. It's taken some time for the council and the auditors to come to a point where it is agreed that the accounting treatment for Sandwell Land and Property is now correct on the council's accounts. And there are still some issues to be resolved with regards to the SLAP accounts themselves, and in particular some legal anomalies that need rectifying. But they can now be resolved separately and will not impact the council's 2018-19 accounts any further. Mark Stocks, our lead from Grant Thornton, will be able to explain this further when he comes to present the audit findings report. So that just explains a bit about the delay and what's been going on for the last few months. With regards to the account, the narrative report at the beginning of the account sets out the main points to be noted, but the figures in here are now out of date, as similar to that Pete raised earlier, really. And a more up-to-date position is available for the council within the 2019-20 draft statement of accounts, which was actually published on Friday, the 28th of August. I'm not therefore intending to go into the figures in the statement of accounts in detail at this point, other than to say that our revenue balances remained healthy at the end of 18-19 and continue to do so, which I think is an important point to make in the current circumstances. I therefore suggest, Chair, that we now allow committee members to raise any queries that they have on the accounts. We'll do our very best to answer after a long period of time since they were produced, and I've got a couple of colleagues here with me who I may have to refer to for some queries, as they've been more closely involved in the detailed preparation of the accounts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca Marr, Head of Finance. Any questions or comments from colleagues in relation to the annual statement of accounts 2018-19? Mr. Hussain, please.
Thanks, Chair. Can you just start off by saying thank you to Rebecca and her team? What seems like I've forgotten all about it, but here we are. So well done. So it's good effort, I think. Looking at Mark's report, we had quite a lot to deal with there, I think. So I'm glad we're nearly there. I think we're nearly there. We're not quite there, but we're nearly there, Rebecca. So just a couple of quick ones. One's perhaps too granular, but I'll ask it anyway. I'm one of the PIs on page. Forgive me, on page 47 of the pack, 13 of the accounts. One of the PIs about the proportion of debts that are older than 90 days. So we're into red territory now. I know this is 18-19. We're just thinking ahead to COVID and the impact of all of that. Presumably that's getting worse, Rebecca, coming into the current year, and what are the plans to deal with that? So that was question number one. Second one was, again, forgive me, on page 85 of the pack. You mentioned, there's a phrase, sorry, I've got my pages all mixed up. There's a phrase in the account somewhere that talks about reset and recovery. So we're entering a reset and recovery phase. And I just wondered if that was actually a thing or just words. So that's the only two sort of queries I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Rebecca?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't got the latest position to hand in terms of the proportion of debts outstanding. But yes, I'm in close contact with Sue Knowles, who's the head of revenues and benefits, in terms of looking at where we are in terms of debt recovery on a regular basis. So I have monthly meetings with her to see where that's at. I've just noticed my colleague Claire's put her hand up as well to come in on that. Did you want to come in on?
Yeah, just on the debt query, we did do a review of old outstanding debt that was contained within the 18-19 accounts, and some of that was written off during 19-20, so it will be reflected when you look at the 19-20 accounts.
Sure. And sorry, Claire, if you could just introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, sorry, my name's Claire Sandland. I'm the service manager responsible for financial reporting and systems.
I'm grateful. Thank you, Claire. Any further questions or comments or any follow-up from Mr. Hussain?
I think there was just
Yeah, on reset and recovery.
Oh yes, sorry. Your second question, reset and recovery,
Yeah.
Mr. Rebecca.
yes, we have a reset and recovery board which meets on a weekly basis, which consists of all of the leadership team. So that's looking at both the impact of COVID on the council and on the local community, on the local economy, and also looking at restarting services and how we go about restarting those in a COVID secure way, and all of the implications that are associated with restarting those services. So yeah, we have a regular meeting which we take place that board on a weekly basis.
Okay, Chair, just on that, I mean that does sound, some of these are things, so that's great. I think there's something there, Chair, that the committee might to think about in terms of sort of reflecting that in when we do the risk registry going forward. I think there's a connection between, sounds like quite an important board that's been set up to react and respond to the challenges and impact on risk. So just as a thought, really, going forward.
I would agree with that, and perhaps a good suggestion would be similar to how we look at the directorate registers. Maybe we could consider the reset and recovery as a type of separate register to look at. I don't know if that's something that we could do, but it certainly strikes me that it's important, and it's important that Audit has discussion on that moving forward if members are in agreement on that particular front.
Come in on that. We do have,
Sure.
I mean, Narinda's just put a hand up as well. We do have a specific risk register around COVID at the moment. So that covers a lot of the work that the Reset and Recovery Board are doing at the moment. And that will be coming to the 17th of September meeting.
Indeed, yes. Narinda, if you could just start off by introducing yourself, please.
Narinda Fagura, Business Partner Audit, Fraud, Risk and Insurance. Bex just said really what I was going to say. So on this, at the next meeting of the Audit Committee on the 17th of September, we'll be bringing to the committee the Strategic Risk Register as you know it, as we presented it in previous meetings, but we will also bring to you a COVID-19 Risk Register, which will talk about the work of the Reset and Recovery Board and the other risks flowing from COVID-19 as well.
Sure, that'd be most helpful. Any further questions or comments on the annual statement of accounts?
I think Mr. Doyle may have a question.
Mr. Doyle, do you have a question?
Good afternoon. Yeah, thank you. And again, thanks to everybody for their efforts on both Grant Thornton's and obviously management side to get these accounts nearly ready. And I suppose, given that sort of introduction, I was wondering on page, on the right page, 86 of the pack. On the Sandwell Land and Property Company piece, we talk about following a management review. Was there an actual management review, or is that the one that was effectively instigated by the auditors?
Rebecca?
Yes, that was the review following that was instigated by the auditors, yeah. So that took place after that.
Okay.
Sure.
Councillor Allen.
Councillor Allen.
Yeah, as obviously one of the two directors in the Sandwell Land and Property Company, we've had a number of meetings on this over the last 6 months, or well, 9 months now, around the issue of its the need to have that company still as it stands. We've heard the reason why we did it was to protect the assets of the schools being sold off. But the government's current stance on academies means that they do not get the land. They get a 125-year lease, which is what we were doing. So I think the next step really is to normalise the whole process, potentially go back to where we had the way the leases were held before by the schools, and the land and property has had its day. I can't see any real financial and dynamic need now, or even a policy need to have that company still existing. So those discussions have taken place, and hopefully over the next 12 months they will be resolved, and the land and property may well be no more. Thank you.
I understand that's the intention and way forward, Rebecca, in terms of Sandwell Land and Property, in terms of what Councillor Allen is saying.
Yes, that's right. We're working on winding down the company over the next few months.
Sure. Any further questions or comments on this one? No? Okay, shall we move on to the final item on the agenda? We take a vote on this one, I believe. Yes, so I'm happy with that, and may I also take this opportunity to echo what my colleagues have said in terms of our thanks to the team here at the council and Grant Thornton for their extensive efforts on this, given the time it's taken and the sheer complexity and hard work involved in putting these accounts together. So I'm happy. Councillor Allen? I think you may be on mute, Councillor Allen.
Well, sorry, I was reading starting to read the next papers. I'm getting ahead of myself.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. So you're happy with that. Okay. Well, Great. Thank you. So let's move on to the final item on the agenda. Then the audit findings, and let's go to Grant Thornton. Mark Stocks and Zoe Thomas join us. Mark Stocks, please.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. That's
great. Thank you very much. So I won't talk you through all of the audit findings report, but I'll take you through the highlights and just sort of point out the key things that you need to be aware of. Although Rebecca's already talked you through the main one, I'd just like to, before I do that, I'd just like to echo the comments of the committee. You know, the finance team have been fantastic in terms of their response to us. You know, I've asked them some very difficult questions, and they've approached it in a fantastic way and been supportive of, you know, getting the accounts into a position where, you know, we're able to sign them and you're able to adopt them. So you know, it's been very much a team effort. So I'm very grateful for all that they've done. If I can take you to page 3 of the report, that just confirms where we are and our intention in terms of the financial statements. For all intents and purposes, we're now finished. There's just you know, a few I's to dot and T's to cross, and we're in a position to give you an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, which is the opinion that you want. It's just saying that, you know, within materiality, then the accounts are accurate. So that's really positive. And then just turning over to the next page onto page 4. Obviously, we have other statutory duties, and the second one's around value for money, where we have to issue a view around the council's use of resources. That opinion or that conclusion is going to be qualified, but it's an except for conclusion. So that's just saying, apart from this one issue, then we're satisfied with how the council's been governed and run, and its financial sustainability. And that issue, I don't think will be a surprise to members. It's around children's services and the views of Ofsted in terms of the performance of children's services, which are obviously now in a trust. But I'll come back to that when we get you know, to the value for money conclusion later on in the report. So, but those are the two main views that we've reached. If I can take you onto page 5, and I'll talk through the next few pages just to give you a feel of what we've been doing and perhaps why the audit has taken as long as it has. So the first one Rebecca's talked about, which is around Samwell Land and Property Company. There's a bit more detail later in the executive summary, so I'll come back to that one because I would like to spend just a little bit of time talking to you about that. In terms of the other areas identified during the audit, in terms of you have a number of private finance initiative schemes that we look at in detail. Being the first year of our audit, we looked at the financial models that support those. We determined that that the liabilities in the accounts perhaps weren't what they ought to be, and so we asked the council to relook at those models. And so what's happened is that the liability that you have for those schemes has actually come down by about 6.3 million. So that's the issue around that, just in terms of making sure you're showing the right liability in the accounts. A lot of the work we do, just moving on to page 6, is around valuation of property, and you'll know from the audit plan that both ourselves and the Financial Reporting Council see that as a significant risk in terms of the estimates in your financial statements. So we've looked in detail at the valuation of your investment properties, and on the whole, we were happy that they were materially valued, so accurately valued. We did sort of wonder whether they were undervalued by about 6.8 million. So that's not material, but it is a figure I just need to draw to your attention. A lot of the time that we spent was on these next 3 bullet points around valuations, and they fall into 2 areas really. One was around the valuation for as at March 2019. When we looked at the valuation of the year end, we weren't sort of comfortable, and we asked the council to in particular revalue schools, and that's meant that the council's had to change the valuation of those assets in its books, so they've increased by 17 million, and on the back of that we then looked at, well, what had happened in prior years, and as part of the estimation sort of process, a sort of a 10% uplift had been applied to those school valuations, amongst other things. And so we asked for those to be looked at again, and again they've driven quite a lot of changes in the accounts. So there are restatements of those assets values going back to 2016-17. But I hasten to add, when you're looking at valuations, there's it's important that you get them right, but there's no loss to the council from those valuations. It's just about getting the accounts accurate. The other things that we looked at, just moving to the right-hand side of that page, we looked at pension guarantees. So the council issues a number of guarantees. So we just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any liability under those guarantees. And once we'd worked through that, we were satisfied that there weren't any significant liabilities. And new to the year was the Children's Trust, and so we looked at a number of aspects of that. The first one was around the pensions, and I'm sure members are aware that the council has guaranteed the pensions of the employees who TP'd across into the Children's Trust. So that means that the liability for those pensions sit on the council's balance sheet rather than the trust's balance sheet. So what we asked for was to look at the agreements and documentation that supported that. There did have to be a couple of additional agreements signed between the trust and the council, but in the end we were happy that those pension liabilities should sit on the council's balance sheet. Similarly, we looked at the Children's Trust and what that meant in terms of was it a going concern and any liabilities that the council had to the organisation, because in reality, you know, you're the sole funding body for the Children's Trust, and you have to be comfortable that that you know you're going to continue to fund it. So so we were happy again in the end, just in terms of how that was treated. We did have to make sure that the trust overspend that the council was funding was properly represented in your financial statements, and that led to an adjustment of around £5 million. The next item on debtors and creditors, I understand, has been resolved now. I'm sure Rebecca can talk in more depth about it than I can. But when we were looking at the debtors and creditors balances, what we identified was that a number of them were very old. Now they were provided for, so it doesn't impact the council's overall provisions, but your ability to collect debts that go back into 2013-14 is quite limited. So what we've asked the council to do is just to, you know, I suppose resolve some of that and write off some of those debts, so you're in a position where, you know, you're only going after the debts that are actually collectible. That exercise did lead to sort of one adjustment where we sort of thought that debtors were perhaps overstated by £1.3 million. Now, you know, in the context of the council, that's just not material, but obviously we just draw that to your attention. Okay, I promised I'd talk to you a little bit about Sandwell Land and Property Company, and because it is quite complex in terms of the accounting, but also in terms of the governance, and the governance goes back any number of years, and so I suppose, you know, the decisions that were made back then have impacted on this year's financial statements. In terms of the accounting, the main issue that we identified was that there's lease between the council and Sandwell Land and Property, such that after 125 years, the land actually returns to the company. It's not owned by the council. Now, in that case, then you can't classify that type of lease as a finance lease, because effectively it's owned by the company. So we made a number of adjustments around that to move the value of those assets out of the council's accounts into Sandwell Land and Property's accounts. It doesn't impact on the buildings, because the buildings, you know, over 125 years would effectively be consumed. So those figures are on paper could be worrying, but they're not, because, you know, Sandwell Land and Property Company, controlled by the council, is fully consolidated into your group financial statements. So whereas your single entity accounts look rather different, your group accounts show that you still own and control that land. So that was the main sort of change that we made, and that did take rather a long time to get to in terms of, well, what's the right accounting. The other issue on the back of that was really around the governance of Sandwell Land and Property Company. And as we were working through the exercise, and the council's lawyers were working through the exercise, what was identified was that perhaps a few years ago, when Sandwell Land and Property was set up, that the shares weren't issued in a manner that they perhaps ought to have been, and so, you know, that's created a level of uncertainty, but that's one of the things the council is working on to resolve. And as the councillor said earlier, the purpose of the company was very clearly to protect the assets of school land and school buildings for the council and the people of the borough. But in reality, there was no need. So all this complexity has come from perhaps a misunderstanding of what the legislation was, because these assets were never going to be moved out of the public purse, for want of a better phrase. So that's taken rather a long time to resolve, but thankfully we're there, and the council has a very clear plan about how to resolve that, and some very clear accounting now. And I know the board of the Sandwell Land and Property have been very strong in trying to sort this out. So that's the main points from the accounts. I just want to draw you to just a few more pages, if I may. If I could just take you to page 15 of the report. The other significant estimate that we look at is the valuation of your pension fund, and what happened during I suppose after the end of the 18-19 financial year was that there were a few legal judgments, one around McLeod and one around guaranteed minimum pensions. And when we looked at that with the council, it indicated that there was additional liabilities that needed to be recognised in the pension fund. And so if you look at the bottom of page 15, you can see that that McLeod in particular has changed the pension fund liability from just around 700 million to around 717 million. So that's obviously a significant change to the financial statements. The guaranteed minimum pensions has had little impact in reality. That's only impacted by £1 million. But again, the council and the finance team, because they want to get this right, have adjusted for that change. Just take you to page 37 now, if I may. So page 37 deals with the value for money conclusion. And you'll recall when we started our plan, we identified two risks. There was one around children's services, which I've spoken to, and then there was one around financial sustainability. On children's services, I think, the focus of the council still needs to remain on improving those children's services. It has a very clear plan with the trust, but it's important that you continue to improve those services and continue to improve the Ofsted rating. In terms of financial sustainability, we reached the conclusion that the council did have appropriate management arrangements. We looked very carefully at your medium-term financial plan and the outturn for 18-19, as well as your capital programme and other liabilities. Particularly now we're in a COVID environment, I think there are quite a lot of risks for local government. So this was the right conclusion for the 18-19 value for money conclusion, but there are pressures now that are on the council, and it is important that you do keep your focus on your financial sustainability. And finally, from me, Chair, just on page 43, we've highlighted some recommendations just in terms of the key things that we think the council ought to be doing. So I'll just draw those to members' attention. Again, the finance team have responded positively to those recommendations, and you can see the management response within there. I'm going to stop talking now. That was a rather long presentation, but it's been a rather long audit, so I felt it deserved one. So I'm happy to take any questions. I'll stop talking now, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. It was a very long but very useful run through, so thank you very much for that. I've got a few pointers myself, a few questions myself, but colleagues first. Anyone with any questions, comments? Okay, Mr. Doyle, please.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for your comprehensive report. I suppose one thing I just wanted to confirm my assumption here is that although there are quite a lot of findings in here, they relate to a relatively small part of the council's effectively financial financial statements. So a lot of areas like revenue recognition, financial controls and IT are broadly okay for lack of exception-based reporting. And the prior year recommendations largely appear to have been concluded as well. Although I think there is one remaining point about journals, but on the whole, core controls appear to be in quite a good state. And so that's a correct assumption. And then very specifically on the land and property piece, we talk about the contingent creditor. Is there a figure that we have in mind as to what that liability would be?
Okay, both good questions. I agree. I think there's lots of positives in this report. You know, you are a large and complex organization. So, you know, so I'm not here going, you know, I'm making fundamental changes to your earmarked or reserves or your general fund, at which point, you know, this perhaps would be a more difficult conversation. You know, what I'm saying is that, you know, the majority of this is right. There are some areas you need to focus on. Most of those the council has already resolved, you know, in terms of valuation. Got a little bit of a journey to go on Sandwell land and property, I think, but you know, the council has responded really positively to what we've said, and as you said, the majority of this was good. In terms of the contingent liability, the contingent liability is between the company and the council. So effectively, a company that you control would have to take legal action against the council. I would class that as remote. So I don't think that would ever happen. But obviously, we're your auditor, so I can't predict the future. So I just have to draw that to your attention.
Sure. Any more questions?
Sorry, Mr. Hussain.
Mr. Hussain, please.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Mark, thanks very much for the report. Incredibly comprehensive. So. And nearly a good read as well, Mark. There's a lot in there. So
nearly, yeah.
I've got a couple of very quick. Yeah, I've got a couple of. I think it's up there actually. It's one of the longest, but I think you needed it, so it's very welcome, Mark. So thank you. Couple of very quick ones. I think the first one was for maybe you, maybe Rebecca. I'm not sure. On the. Sorry, I hate all this remote business. On page 3, where you summarise the overall audit adjustment value of 18.1. It's just probably me. I couldn't quite square that with listing of all the audit adjustments later on in the report, Mark. And I just wanted to double check that if I were to go back again and look at those adjustments, that it will come to 18.1 as, you know, sort of a minor point. Just want to make sure Rebecca was happy with what was reported in your report on the listing of audit adjustments. So that was question number 1. And then the second one is around. Again, forgive me as I scroll down manically to the next one. Page 252 of the pack. Right, here we go. Yeah, page 250. This is where the impact of unadjusted misstatements, and I think this one's for Rebecca. The actual finding, Rebecca, on I think it's finding number 8 about creditors receipt in advance, and your response specifically, where you say, you know, you did not consider it necessary to provide an audit trail to support this balance. I mean, I think I know what you're saying, and the value is immaterial, but it's still 3.8 million. You know, are we saying that we don't have the supporting evidence for that? For that value, or we just didn't think we needed to put it together to respond to Grant Thornton's query. The reason why I ask is I think later on in Mark's report also, I think there was an impact on the audit fee, things around queries around debtors and creditors. So they're the 2 queries. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Rebecca, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, a bit like you, I'm struggling with some of the page numbers and the references on some of it. In terms of the audit adjustments that are detailed in the audit findings report, I'm sure Zoe from Grant Thornton will agree that we've been through those a number of times backwards and forwards and agreed those. So I'm happy with those audit adjustments that they are accurate. In terms of the backing information or the transaction listing for the debtor and creditor listing, I think if I'm thinking about the right one, the issue was that because Thornton were new auditor, our new auditor for 2018-19, this was a new requirement that we hadn't been asked for before by our previous auditors, and the difficulty we had with this transaction listing was it was one of those, if you don't run the report as at the date, it's an out of date and it keeps moving, so we didn't have a report that actually balanced back fully to the balance that was in the balance sheet at that time. And what we've done now is, now that we're aware that that's a requirement, that has been, we've ensured that that working paper is available for 1920, and it will from now on. I can see Claire's putting a hand up, so she'll add to that, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, it was built into the close down timetable, so it was picked up for 1920 close down. It, like you say, it's a case of not running the report as at the date and time required, and we couldn't run it retrospectively.
Okay, because I think, and if I'm wrong, please say so, Mark, but I think there was a fee impact because of the additional time on that particular query.
It's not just on that query, Jay. There's there was other things we were looking at, particularly sort of the bad debt provision. So it was, I'm going to be supportive of Claire and Rebecca. I think it is a one-time issue. I think the computer system had moved on, and usually the computer systems allow you to do retrospective things, but this one didn't, and so it was we just had to make a decision. Did we try and do a retrospective reconciliation, which I think would have cost quite a lot of money and time from the finance team, or did we just live with it? But I suppose to reassure the committee, it wasn't it wasn't that the finance team couldn't be bothered. They really cared about the accuracy of the accounts. It just wasn't in their ability to go back and provide it retrospectively.
Yeah, but just to be clear, that's now been sorted going forward, Rebecca. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hussain. Any more questions? I've just got a question, Mark, if I may. In terms of council debt for 18-19, were you relatively satisfied that we were in a secure position? Because again, going back to some of the discussion at the beginning of the meeting, looking now to 19-20 moving forward, the concern is around the various challenges now for Sandwell Council, particularly with the coronavirus pandemic, and it'd be useful to know how you feel about 18-19 and where we were back then.
It's a good question. You have a significant level of reserves as a council, and I think that that provides you with a cushion in terms of some of the impacts. I was looking at the 1920 accounts today, so just moving on quickly. So and one of the things I noticed is that you're starting to sort of draw from reserves in terms of your to balance revenue. So your debt isn't to answer the question right, your debt isn't sort of an outlier in terms of others. You are starting to draw revenue from reserves to balance the revenue position. So, but you do have a healthy level of reserves. So I think it's I suppose what I'd ask of you as a committee and as a council is to continue to be supportive of your finance team in terms of making the savings that need to be made in this difficult COVID environment, and to recognise some of the risks that there are in terms of income collection and some of the expenditure that you're trying to that you're having to incur. So it's but I think compared to other councils, I think you're in a relatively strong position.
Sure. Thank you very much for that, Mark. That's reassuring to hear. And of course, the committee will be looking, I think, at the draft accounts for 1920 in November of this year, if I remember correctly, or Rebecca will correct me if I'm wrong. Any further questions on the audit findings report for Grant Thornton, Rebecca and the finance team? Any questions from members?
No.
Well, if that's it, then thank you all very much for attending this Thursday evening. We shall, of course, reconvene on the 17th of September 2020 to resume with the ordinary business of the committee. And of course, the hope is for this year 2020 that we will now, via this form or as much as we can, have meetings more frequently moving forward.
Councillor Yassine has just joined the meeting and has his hand up.
Oh, right. Councillor Yassine Hussain, welcome. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much and a good evening to all. Sorry about the delay for joining in late. I just wanted to clarify, right, that I've joined in and I apologise to you guys for starting late.
No, well, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much, Councillor Hussain. And before we end the meeting, actually, I think we need to go to the vote. So, Councillor Hussain, you have come at...
that last item was just...
Is that just for that? Oh, of course. Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much. So I was saying that in this year, 2019 was, of course, significantly disrupted, this committee and all other things by the coronavirus pandemic, but the hope is now that through this new format online, as long as we need to, we can have more frequent meetings moving forward and hopefully a successful year. Thank you very much for everyone for attending, all members and officers. Thank you very much for Grant Thornton as well, and we'll be back on the 17th of September. Have a very good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks.
Bye.